Welcome to Better Thinking, a podcast that explores sports betting through a different lens. I'm your host, John Statsational Alicia. Today we're joined by Dr. Dan Ariely, one of the world's leading behavioral economists. He's the best-selling author of Predictably Irrational and The Upside of Irrationality. His TED Talks on human behavior and decision-making have reached millions of viewers worldwide. Dr. Ariely isn't a sports bettor, yet his research into how humans handle risk and uncertainty offers valuable insights for anyone looking to make better betting decisions. This conversation exemplifies what makes Better Thinking unique. While other betting podcasts focus on picks and predictions, we seek out experts who can help you understand the science behind better decision-making. Let's get started with Dr. Dan Ariely. Dr. Ariely, thank you for joining me on Better Thinking.
My pleasure. Looking forward to the discussion.
You know, when I reached out to you, you had mentioned to me, you said, "Well, I'm not a sports bettor. I don't know a lot about sports betting," and I think you had a little apprehension. But have you ever gambled or done any of the sort?
I gamble daily with my time. You're an example of this. So no, but more seriously, I do gamble a lot with my time. I meet with lots of random people. I start lots of projects. So I gamble a lot with my time. I bought some cryptocurrency a while ago. You can decide if to call this gambling or not. I don't think I've gambled on anything else. I've never bought a lottery ticket, for example.
Interesting. So you're not a casino person. You're not going and playing blackjack or anything like that.
No, I've been to some casinos, but as a social scientist, I walk around and look at people.
Interesting. I think gambling and just lends itself to social scientists for a lot of different experiments, for sure.
Yeah. So if you think about the kind of the basic of B.F. Skinner, right? B.F. Skinner, the famous psychologist, basically talked about schedules of reinforcement. And he asked the question of what happens when an animal has a lever and it presses, let's say, 200 times on the lever and it gets a pellet of food. For how long does the animal keep on doing it? And then he says, what if it's random? What if it's not every 200 you get one? What if it's a random number between 1 and 400, the expected value is the same? What happens now? And he found that animals were pressing for much longer. They kept on pressing even when the reward went away. And even after a while that the reward was not there, one reward would drop, the animal would come right into it. So this is, for me, the foundations of gambling. It's about the randomness of the reward and the fact that you don't know when it will come. Let's take casino gambling. If you would say every 100 times I do this, for every $100 I do this, I get 90 back, that's not very exciting. But if it's a random number, now we're in a different world. And of course, a lot of things like cell phones are built on these notions of random reinforcement. Most likely when your phone pings, it's not that interesting and not that important. But from time to time, it's really exciting. And it gets us to keep on looking and sometimes risking our lives when we drive.
Yeah, I think everyone, they may, and I've heard your TED Talk from a while ago, 15 years ago, and you were asking people, how many of you have texted and at the same time of driving? And I think we all fall into that. It's the dopamine rush that I think the app builders and the social media app companies for sure have been able to tap into. There's a phenomenal amount of science that goes into it. I mean, we see it in the casinos as well, where for years they've figured out the science behind colors and smells and sounds that are going to entice us to play.
That's right. And the right level of alcohol and the no clocks and all of those things are very conducive to continuing to part with our money. And then there's another level that is very interesting, what's called mental accounting. So mental accounting is basically the question of, we can take money and paint it in a different color, and then we feel differently about spending it. So for example, if I gave you now $1,000 in Amazon gift certificate, good for 10 years, you would feel very comfortable spending it quickly because the money would be Amazon. If you go to a casino and you take $1,000 and replace it with chips, you basically create your own gift card, and now you feel very free to spend it. And what if you made some money? Well, if you took $1,000, you made it into chips, you started spending it, and now you're at 100,000. Is it your money? Is it play money? How do you think about it? And from what I understand, is that for most people it feels like it's still casino money. So they wouldn't say, okay, I made so much money, let me cash out. They would say, it's still casino money. I have an easier time. Like, imagine you took $1,000, changed it to chips, made $100,000, and then lost all the $100,000. How much would you feel that you've lost?
Right. It depends. The time frame would matter as well, right?
Yeah.
Right. I've always thought about it.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the show Deal or No Deal?
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating show. I don't think it's on anymore, but there was a big board, and you'd have dollar values ranging from $1 all the way up to $1 million. And the contestant would pick, they were suitcases with numbers, and in the suitcase would be a certain denomination. And what they would do is you'd pick suitcases, and that suitcase would be eliminated. So if you picked that suitcase, you lost whatever that dollar value was up on the board. And as the game went on, obviously you'd have some sort of an expected value based on what the numbers left, the dollar values left on the board were, and they would offer you a prize to quit the game. Now you're taking average people, and they would sometimes have $100,000 or a $200,000 offer, but that prize of $1 million was still out there. Now the average person would never actually risk that $100,000 if it was in their bank account and they worked for it. Yet during the process of the game, they'd say, you know what, I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to go for that $1 million.
Yeah. Plus, it's socially, lots of people are watching you and so on. But when I was thinking about this discussion that we're going to have, and about gambling, and I have been thinking a lot recently about the fact that people don't take enough risks in their own lives. So gambling is a one activity, but in general, I think that people are too timid. I think that we don't take enough chances. I think we stay in the same relationship for too long, and we stay in the same jobs too long, and we go to the same restaurants, and just the list goes on and on. We pick comforts over taking risk, and the idea why we don't take risk goes back to our evolutionary history. Imagine an animal in the jungle. If an animal in the jungle takes a risk and things go well, how well can it be? A couple of days more life, right? You risk something, you hunt something, okay, you have another week of life. If something goes badly, what happens? Then game over, right? You're being eaten. So in the ancient world, when we grew up, evolutionary speaking, the upside and the downsides were very non-symmetrical. The upside was very limited, and the downside was all the way down to being eaten. So because of that, evolutionary speaking, it made sense to be afraid of taking risks, basically to be very risk averse, not to try and risk it because the lack of symmetry. Now move forward to modern day life. Many risks are good risks to take, but even then, we don't take them. And we have what we call, loss aversion. We're worried about the downside. And what is called the Samuelson's paradox? Have you heard of this?
I have not, no.
Okay. So Paul Samuelson, the famous economist, tells the following story. he goes to the economics department and he says to one of his buddies, he said, look, I want to give you a gamble. I'm going to change the numbers, but it was many years ago, so I'm adjusting for inflation. He said, I'll toss a coin. If it's heads, I'll give you $120. If it's tails, you'll give me $100. Plus 120 minus 7. And he says to his friend, would you like to play? And the friend says, no, I don't want to. And Samuel says, why? And the friend says, look, I understand that the expected value is positive, but if I'll win $120, I'll be only slightly happy. If I'll lose $100, I'll be really miserable for a very long time. So I don't want to take the risk. And this is why what we call loss aversion, right? We suffer more from losses that we enjoy gains of similar magnitude. And then Samuelson says, what if we play the game 1,000 times? Would you play it? And I said, of course, let's start. Then someone said, I'm not going to play it with you, but think about what it is that you're telling me. You're telling me that if I came to you every day you would say, I don't want to play. But then 3 years later, 1,000 days later, you would look back at 1,000 days and say, what an idiot I've been. I should have played. And the idea is that, life doesn't hand us the same gambles every day. But when we look at gambles one at a time, we are afraid of losing and we're not sufficiently risk-taking. But if we could get ourselves to look at things as a portfolio and saying, what kind of life do I want to live? Like imagine somebody gave you the Samuelson's bet every day for the rest of your life. At the end of your life, you would say, I could have had 80 years of playing this game. I gave it up. So how do we... So the thought there is, how do we override our instinct of being afraid of losses to such a degree that we give up on lots of opportunities? Now, I'm not talking about sports betting. I'm talking about gambling in life. Sports betting is much more organized. You understand the expected value. There's a fun to it and so on. I'm talking about decisions where the fun is not in the gamble. It's about the real consequences.
But doesn't it become, obviously, it does become harder to do when we're talking about life as you get more responsibility in your life. Aren't these risks easier to take when you're 21 years old?
Yeah, they are. But still the question is the same. So I'm not saying, go willy-nilly about your relationships and kids and jobs and so on. But if you accept the idea that we are designed to avoid risk, and that because of that, we might look at things in the wrong way and be so fearful every day that we end up living not the life we want to do, that's a very worrisome thought.
Hey, Better Thinking listeners, are you ready to take your sports betting game to the next level? Don't miss out on the Sharp app, the ultimate tool for smarter betting decisions. With expert insights, real-time data, and strategies that give you the edge, the Sharp app is a game changer. And here's the kicker. For a limited time, you can get 35% off your pro subscription with the code THINKING35. Don't be the one left behind while everyone else is cashing in. Download the Sharp app today at sharp.app and start betting smarter. Yeah, I tell you, when I worked on Wall Street in my previous life, and I was interning in the back office on Wall Street. So oftentimes in the back office, it's not nearly as glamorous as what you think what you see on television. And I was maybe 18, 19 years old. And I remember looking at everyone. Most of the people were just miserable. And it was no different, I'm sure, in any other office around the country, in any other sort of business. And I said to myself, I don't want to get so complacent that the money's good, but not necessarily life-changing. It's good enough that I can have a house and a family and all those things, but I'm also a slave to the job. And I think that's how most people feel, but that's the easy road to take, because if you do what everyone else is doing, there's less of a chance for you to be eaten, like you said, in the jungle, right?
Yeah, only the jungle is not there anymore, right? So the metaphor for the jungle is that there used to be lions. Now there are not that many lions, but we're still over, like, I think that forget sports betting for a second, because somebody is fixing it's such a complex mechanism that the odds are very organized. But when we think about general decisions in our lives, I think that most of them, the expected value is positive, right? When you say, what kind of improvements can I make in my life? Improving my relationship, the way I spend money, my relationship with my kids, the things I read. I mean, look at all of these things. The expected value in making changes are probably positive in all of those elements. But if you overemphasize the negative consequences, what if I try and it doesn't work out well? Then that fear is going to get you to underinvest in things that are, on average, good for you.
But is that not just loss aversion, but that's also a social thing? We see, I've seen this with people who may be friends or family, and they're not necessarily wishing bad upon you, right? But they're not all that upset if you go out and take some crazy risk and it fails. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you see that.
So on the social side, there's a couple of things. So when we talk about loss aversion and being afraid of being eaten, these are all individual risks. Now you're adding to it the social element. So the social element is interesting because society is very punishing for people who go outside of the boundaries. Right? Now, why is society punishing for people that go outside of the boundaries? And the reason is that society wants us to collaborate. So imagine that we live in a small community of 200 people. What is the architecture of that community? What is a good architecture of that community? It's a community with lots of trust, right? I want to trust people. I want to know that if you and I are going hunting and we split and you find something, you'll share it with me. I want to know that fairness is important to you. I want to know that you are not selfish, that you're collaborative in nature. So because of that, we have lots of mechanisms to punish people who are not playing nice with other people, right? The mechanism of basically gossip and revenge, right? Because you act not nicely and will tell on you and other people would not play with you and so on. That's all when there was a small community. That instinct for gossip and revenge has sadly expanded. Now, we don't just use gossip and revenge to get people in our community to get more in line. We use it for other people that we'll never deal with and we don't have anything to do with them, and so on. So it's kind of a mechanism, I think a bit like an autoimmune disease, right? It's a mechanism that was useful when we lived in a small community. Now in cancel culture, it's completely out of the way. It was good. Like if you now say a foul joke somewhere and people try to cancel you, the people who know you and care about you, know your character, are not going to be affected by it. Right? This mechanism is supposed to help keep people to collaborate more with their close environments. But now it's lopsided. And of course, there's, you mentioned, Schadenfreude, right? That some people are happy with. By the way, I looked at that at some point. I had a couple of really interesting years when people who believed that COVID was an invented illness attacked me. I got death threats. People burned my books, sent me videos of them burning my books. It was very, very tough few years. And I spent a month trying to convince people I wasn't that evil, and then I gave up and I interviewed people. So I spent 2 years trying to understand this world in which people believe something strange, and then continue with this. But in this process, I learned a lot about the dark side of society and how some things became some social mechanisms that used to serve us very well to get us to be more cohesive and to play better together are now completely out of whack.
Is that what led to the book Misbelief? Is that
exactly?
Yeah.
Misbelief is exactly that. It's exactly the first chapter is my personal story, and then I talk about the psychology that gets people to start believing in something that ain't so, and then continue. So, by the way, I think it's a very important book. It's if I know, not for me to say, but this idea that it's so easy to start to adopt a false narrative and start believing it more and more. I think it's a very important element of our time. Like if you ask 10 years ago, what are the big social challenges for humanity, misinformation wouldn't have been one of the top. I think now the way society interacts with social media, it is one of the top.
Well, we're at an all-time low, I think, in trust in institutions. But I think part of that, obviously social media plays a big part in that, but I think we've also seen the curtain get pulled back on some of these institutions as well. I mean, you had the Twitter files where we saw there was interaction between the government and Twitter and presumably with other social media sites. And I think people have lost a lot of trust in the government because of that. They've lost trust in media because of that. Some of it is warranted. Where maybe 30 years ago, 30 years ago, you would say, listen, I know politicians are corrupt, but you would just kind of say it and you deal with it, or you wouldn't deal with it. You would just, that would be in the back of your mind. I know all politicians are corrupt, and that was it. Now you've got an outlet. Now you see it in your face on a daily basis. Maybe they're no more corrupt than they were 30 years ago, but we see it.
Yeah. My metaphor from this is that when you go in the summer to a pool, you know that some kid must have peed in the water. But if they stand on the edge and they pee, it's much harder to jump in. The realness of it is correct. But so no, we do have a crisis of trust. There's no question. But we don't also only have a crisis of trust. We also have a crisis of resilience. If you think about what kind of negative shocks, you know what? Let me say something different, because I think it's interesting about betting. As people get more stressed, they see more patterns.
That's good. I wanted to get to this, so I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah. So my favorite study on this is comparing fishermen that fish in the deep ocean versus fishermen that fish in the lake. And the fishermen that fish in the lake have a very predictable life. The fishermen who fish in the deep ocean, things change, winds, currents. Which one of those two develop more superstitions? The one in the deep ocean. They think, clapping twice and doing something would control it. But it's more than that. When we are stressed, we're looking for patterns. An animal in the jungle that thinks there's a tiger around is looking at everything and say, okay, these two leaves are moving. It's probably must be something behind. So when we're stressed, we see more patterns. We see more patterns in terms of how the government works. We probably see more pattern in terms of the stock market. I see how these things are connected. Maybe it's even connected to other types of betting. So stress basically creates this need to find patterns, and then we find them because we want to understand the world. The other thing I said about resilience is that we're at a stressful time with low resilience. Usually resilience is what helps us deal with stress. Perceived stress is real stress minus resilience, right? The resilience is what helps us deal with. Why do we have less resilience? We have less friends. We spend less time with friends. We spend more time with our nuclear family. We have less work friends, especially since COVID. And even if some people got back to work, we haven't really built up those relationships. And then finally, when societies become more economically unequal, resilience goes down, even at the level of neighborhoods. Why? Because people are less likely to ask each other for help. Right? So we are kind of at the high time of stress, low time of resilience, and very, very unhealthy. And now we can easily find stories, lose trust, try to explain the world, and so on.
isn't this how in history this has happened before? And that can lead to maybe an authoritarian type of regime to be able to take over. And this has happened on the left and the right, so it's not
Yep.
unique
Yeah,
to either side.
no, it's not. It's not unique to other side, and the idea is that it's very, very hard to live with uncertainty. Just a very, very tough existence. So that's why we look for a story, and we look for somebody with a story that could explain to us what happened and hopefully take us out of that. But it's a very, very tough psychologically. It's a very tough situation to deal with uncertainty. By the way, from all of these things, the people who go gambling are kind of heroes, right? These are people who take risk and enjoy uncertainty. It's kind of amazing.
The people who do it professionally, I think especially are unique in that aspect for sure. I've contemplated writing a book myself. It's a you know better than anyone. It's quite the endeavor. But you being an academic, I guess it comes a little bit more naturally maybe to you. But looking at life through the lens of a gambler, of a sports bettor, and how you may analyze things differently, just like you as a scientist may analyze things differently. But even you, I'm sure, knowing the data and seeing some of these studies, can still get it wrong, and could still find yourself falling into the same traps the rest of us do.
Yeah, of course. I certainly make mistakes when it comes to little decisions. I think I do make less mistakes when it comes to big decisions where I have time and I can think about it. And I think I also make less mistakes when it comes to habitual decisions. Things I do repeatedly and I think about them and so on. But I do think that looking at life through the lens of sports bettors could be very, very enlightening, right? How do they look at risk? But here is my question to you. So I did a risk attitude study on crazy professional athletes, people that dive off cliffs and jump with bikes and all kinds of things like that. And what was interesting is that I found they took crazy risks in the outdoors, but they were not at all risk-seeking in other areas of their lives. So you would not say, oh, these people are, they're investing in the stock market like crazy, or they do. No, there was this one area where they were off the scale risk takers, but in other areas they were completely tame. What do you think about sports gamblers? What are they also wild in every aspect of their lives?
I would say I would say that I would put it in two different categories: the professional and the recreational player. And I think some of the recreational players may actually fall into being reckless in a lot of aspects of their life because they may not take a very analytical approach to the game. And for them, it's more about the thrill. So it's either the thrill of the bet or it's the thrill of jumping out of a plane or whatever that may be. I think the professional, I never thought about it. I know from my standpoint, I'm not a risk taker outside of the markets and sports betting and poker and those aspects. But and I think it's because I look at things through that lens of I'm always trying to quantify what the risk is, right? And the reward. So if I don't see the reward, I don't necessarily want to take the risk. And I'm looking at life as an EV equation constantly. And perhaps maybe in certain aspects of my life, maybe I should be taking more risk, as you suggested, because maybe the downside is not nearly as great as you as you pointed out, because there's two sides to an EV equation. It's what you're going to gain from that, and also what you're going to lose. And if you're overestimating the losses, perhaps you're missing out on a lot of things in your life.
Yeah. And my guess is that stock market betting and sports betting are very different, because the stock market, in principle, everybody could win. if the stock market goes up. And my guess is in sports betting, it's zero-sum game, more or less. Forget the house for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering whether, one of the things we don't like when people do is to adopt a zero-sum game perspective to life. You can say, life is a zero-sum game. If I gain, somebody else loses, or somebody always have to lose if somebody else's wins. But life is not like that. Some things are, but some things are not like that. So another question to you is, do you think that people who do sports betting specifically, where let's just say that it's mostly a zero-sum game, do you think that people adopt that perspective for the rest of their lives? So they basically start looking at everything. Like you said, what made me think about it, you said you look at everything as an expected value, but do you also start thinking that if somebody wins, somebody would lose, and you stop thinking about ways to enlarge the pie or for everybody to win?
That's interesting. I don't think I do. I don't think I look at things in that sense as a zero-sum game. Like if I win, and I don't know if that's unique to me or not. When I look at other endeavors that I'm involved in, I think it's a benefit if everyone can kind of succeed. So if you're in a negotiation, let's say, and I do some real estate investing as well. Ultimately, any negotiation, you want to get the better end of the deal, right? But for negotiations, I think long-term and any of these deals long-term to be beneficial, both sides need to come out of it feeling like they did well. So you're never going to get exactly what you wanted. Neither is the other party. But if you can both leave the table and say, you know what, I'm happy, I'm satisfied, maybe not happy, but I'm satisfied with the outcome. I think it's beneficial to that deal and maybe potential deals in the future. So I always look at it through that lens.
Yeah. Repeated games. So you basically look at it through the lens of repeated games. I want this person to come and play nice with me the next time we're playing. Yeah. I think the place where life is the least zero-sum game is in love, right? In romantic love, where if you start, who is going to bicker more? That's a very bad story. And
I had a sociology professor in college who said that in relationships, there's always one party that loves the other party way more. So there's always in a marriage, either the wife or the husband's always going to love the other one more, and that's the dynamic of the relationship.
Yeah, my guess is it's very likely to be. No two things are the same, but the question is it a good thing or a bad thing, and who is going to lead the trajectory of the relationship, right? So if the person who loves more will lead the trajectory of the relationship, then you have the sum is positive. And if the person who loves less is going to lead, then the sum is...
Because they could take advantage of the situation that the other person is going to. So you'll see that you've heard stories of, people who are manipulators, maybe sociopaths or something of that sort. And there are a fair percentage of people who are sociopathic. They may or narcissists who are going to be able to manipulate the relationship. They know that they've got someone who really is going to follow them because they love them a lot, and they can manipulate them in the relationship to do what they want to their benefit, not necessarily to the other person's benefit.
Yep. I feel you want to tell something about your...
No, I'm going to keep it at that. But when we talk, I bring up sociopaths, and I mentioned this on a previous podcast that I did a week ago. I had heard a sociologist years ago talking about sociopathic mentality when it comes to trading on Wall Street and investors, and how having that lack of empathy or the lack of the ability to disconnect money from the emotions was a key factor and a key trait that she found in a lot of traders. And of course, that I think would translate well to poker players or sports bettors if they're doing this for a living, to be good at it. Have you noticed that?
There's a saying that physicians should not care about their patients. But now let me say, what do I mean by that? I mean that if physicians really care about their patients, like their family members, for example, the emotional attachment makes it very hard to make the right decisions. That there are things that we want to be emotionally detached. And you can think our surgery, right? If you are a surgeon, you don't want to perform surgery on anybody you love. That would be just tough. You could the emotions will be overwhelming, and you probably wouldn't be able to do your job. So emotional attachment in some things is very important. And I think what you're saying about the traders is like that, right? If it's a lot of money, then the money is making it hard for you to think straight, and you're too afraid or so on, not necessarily the right mindset.
Do we have the ability to maybe train ourselves to become more like that without being sociopathic?
I had a meeting many years ago with the Dalai Lama, and he thinks that the training of meditation is creating this attachment. That there's a way to see things and to detach the emotion that comes with it, or to notice the difference between the thing and the emotion, and to do that. At the time, I proposed to him some experiments. I said, if you will give me some of your monks, we can try to explore this. It was not sufficiently interesting for him to test this, but at least they're saying that it's possible. But my guess is that for us mortals, not Dalai Lama and his trained monks, for us we need to do something that would trick us into doing it. So just as a couple of examples, one of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to look at your portfolio first and then decide what to do. Why? Because if you see your portfolio first and you lost money, you're in a bad mood. If you see your portfolio, you made a lot of money, you're in a good mood. Not a good recipe for making good decisions, right? So you want to think about which companies are going up and which companies are going down in your mind before you see what has happened in the past. So that's one example of saying, I don't want to decide in an environment that first gets me to be emotional and that gets me to make decisions. The other thing is to try and see things from both sides. So, you mentioned this earlier, like, would you buy this or would you sell it, right? So, imagine I went into your portfolio tonight, and imagine I sold all your stocks and bonds, and tomorrow you wake up and it's all in cash. Would you go back to the exact position you had yesterday? Right? If there are things that you wouldn't, then you say, why am I in that position, right? If you think that company X is worth 150 and you think it's going up, you should buy it. If you think it's going down, you should sell it. But of course, we are slaves to our past decisions. And if the stock you bought it at 300, now it's 170, you feel really bad about selling it, even if you think most likely it will go down. So sometimes another good thing to say is, what would I have done on the other side of that transaction? I think crypto is interesting, extra interesting right now. Right? So I don't know how much Bitcoin is, but let's say it's $100,000. All the people who have it, you should say, would you sell it? Would you sell it now on this price, and would you buy it now on this price? And what you want people to say is, be consistent. Yes, I would not sell it, and yes, I would buy it. If it was $1 less, right? You basically want to see that both, and sometimes both sides of the transaction help us with our emotions. So you either imagine a system that you either try to create a system with no emotion, like you don't look at your portfolio first, or you think about both sides of the transaction as a way to see really where you are.
Yeah, I think it's easier said than done, of course. But when you mentioned that with you mentioned that with Bitcoin or just anything, a stock in general, when you look at an analyst report, they have a buy, sell, and hold. So I'm kind of getting from you, maybe hold is kind of maybe that's a cop out. you should either be a buyer or a seller, and not a holder, let's say.
Yeah. You can interpret hold as like, I'm not sure.
Right.
So let's not go through the effort of taking an action. Right. There's also cost of action, but yeah, it's in reality it's a cop out. Yeah. You should think, is this going up or is this going down?
I've got a lot of background in trading, and again, there's a lot of overlap in sports betting. But you are 100% correct. I've seen it a million times, especially in trading, where the price action dictates your feeling about whether or not you're going to hold on to this, and not necessarily an analysis of exactly where that company is at this point, and what you think. So that's why stocks fall at a much quicker pace than they ever increase. I think because emotionally, you saw this with COVID. You mentioned COVID. In the beginning of COVID, the market just absolutely tanked, and then it rebounded quite quickly.
Yeah.
But we will see that drop be a lot more precipitous, and it will drop. All corrections in markets, or all times that we've had 2007, 2008, when the market had a big sell-off, certainly 1989, the late 90s, and of course the Great Depression, things fall quicker than they go up in the market. And that has got to be a psychological thing, because the market is just made up of a group of people.
Yeah. Bubbles are actually one of the easiest things to create in the lab. We are basically herding animals. We follow the herd, and we do it on the upside and the downside, both not in a good way. But let me tell you something else about the stock market. Did you see our work in Irrational Capital?
No, I have not.
Okay, so I'll tell you what we've done. So I got data going back to 2006 about how companies are treating their employees and how the employees feel about the company. And I basically took the 2006 data and said, how does that predict the 2007 stock market, and so on until today? And it turns out that some things are very predictive about stock market return. So, for example, salary, how much companies pay, don't predict alpha. Fairness in payment predicts it. Health benefits don't predict much. Retirement benefits don't predict much. Feeling appreciated predicts a lot. So usually we think about what's called extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation are all the things that are written in your contract. We'll give you these days off, and we'll give you this health insurance and this salary and so on. Those things don't matter that much. Intrinsic motivation. Do you feel appreciated? Do you have a connection to your direct manager? Do you feel aligned with the goals of the company? Do you feel psychological safety? Is the level of bureaucracy low? All of those things are highly connected.
When you said fairness in salary, is that how did you quantify the fairness?
Very good question. It was people's subjective statements about fairness. Do you feel now? When I go and talk to people on Wall Street on this, they say, "Oh, we don't like these subjective measures," and I say, "You're wrong." Why do I say you're wrong? I said, let's think about pain and love. I don't have a good neural measurement of your pain. Even if I could measure it, it doesn't predict well. Eventually, pain is a subjective feeling. It's that your neural activity is a very bad predictor of how much pain you're actually feeling. The same thing is true about love. If I ask you, how much love do you feel? I can measure the amount of love emoticons you send your significant other, but the real measure is how much in love are you? And it's eventually a subjective feeling. And we want a subjective feeling. So the people on Wall Street really don't like it. But I think that there are many things, and our real care about the company we work for, our real care about the people there, our motivation to work, I think all of those things are incredibly subjective. Like I told you, that feeling appreciated, I don't know how to quantify feeling appreciated. How many thank you emails you get? How many winks somebody gets at you? How many times a year your boss invites you for coffee or for beer? No, eventually it's a subjective state, but that's the one that we care about, that we want. So I do think that we need, like, we have this thing about objective measures. I like objective measures too. How much people are paying? Let's look at the hard numbers. But there are some things where the subjective experience is what matters. Like, how connected do you feel to the US? How much in love are you with your significant other? Those are eventually real subjective things.
So what I'm getting is if you're listening and you own a business, building the right culture may be one of the most important things you could possibly do for the success of that business.
Absolutely. We tend to play with the extrinsic motivators, or let's move this salary to that salary, give another day off, and so on. And it's fine. But the real things are about the intrinsic motivation and the culture, right? Do you have a small business where people feel appreciated? Do people feel that they're being treated fairly, that salaries are fair, that promotions are fair? Is there psychological safety? Do people feel comfortable saying to each other what they really think and feel? Yeah.
Well, perception is more important often than reality. Maybe more so than not. I was in a job at one point. I was staying with the same company but moving into a different role, and they were interviewing people for my role. And someone who I'd previously worked with interviewed for that job, and he didn't realize that I was kind of moving on to a different role. He said, "Isn't that your job?" I said, "Yeah, it is." I said, "But it's fine. You could interview. I'm going to be doing something else." And of course, when he told me what the salary was, it was higher than what I was making. And so you go from, I had no problem with the job, to suddenly you're pissed off. And now because you're like, well, if they were willing to pay someone new to come in here and do the job for 10% more money, why didn't they just give me that money? So, you may have been satisfied with what you're making, but when you realize the guy next to you doing the same work is getting paid, if you're getting paid $100,000 and they're getting $125,000, suddenly your $100,000 that you were satisfied with is not very satisfactory anymore.
Yep. Now, just imagine that you have different chromosomes than you have right now.
Yes.
Imagine you're a woman and you're in an office and other people are getting paid more just because they have a different chromosome structure. What a situation.
Well, I think has that not now evened out at this point in 2024?
I haven't seen numbers for 2024, but the wage gap is still substantial.
Now, when they take into, and I'm not an expert in this, but when you take into account when you remove the variables that you have to remove, with maybe women leaving the workforce to have a family or things like that, doesn't it really get close? I know Google did a whole study on this years ago when they had the James Des Moines, I believe his name was, who was an engineer there at Google, and kind of brought this up after they had a meeting. And then Google's own internal investigation said we're actually paying women more than we're paying men.
Yeah. So the thing is, it's about supply and demand. So imagine a woman that has more demand at home, and she can have less flexibility in terms of work hours, or in terms of the need to take a day off. When we have unequal home relationships, we all agree to that. And now when you come to the workplace, you have unequal demands. One person can, be very flexible, the other person doesn't. So the workplace has more levers. They said to the woman, look, you need to, if you want these things, you need to compromise more. Right? So women go to other professions, but even in the same professions, it's still lower salary. And you can understand how, in a system that is negotiating to pay the least, this will happen. It still happens.
So it's not necessarily maybe some sort of a discriminatory act on the employer. It may be the fact that women have different demands on them, different,
That's right.
and certainly on the extremes, women and men in the center are pretty much the same, right? But when we get to the extremes, that's where we differentiate. Men are more aggressive. That's why there's more men in prison, right? There's more risk-taking would be more of a masculine trait.
That's right. So the extremes are very different, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have men, we have more geniuses, but we also have more people who are retarded. Our distribution is much higher. We have more mental illness. We have a wider distribution, and the logic for this, at least the evolutionary logic, is imagine you need to play with genetic mutations, and the genetic mutation can be successful, and the genetic mutation can be very unsuccessful. What would you play with, men or women?
Yeah, I mean, women would be, right?
No. So if you played, so here's the story, right?
Okay,
Let's say
go
you
ahead.
play with women. If you play with women, a good genetic mutation, great. A bad genetic mutation would keep on going. If you play with men, a good genetic mutation,
the men die, it dies off.
It would die off, right?
Yeah.
So because women are more selective in having sex than men, if a man has a bad genetic mutation, women would not have sex with us, and that genetic mutation would die. If a woman has a very undesirable genetic mutation, we would still have sex with them, right? We don't discriminate. It would keep on going.
Got it.
So for nature, if you're a gambler, look, we're finding topics about gambling. But if nature is a gambler, nature wants to gamble more with men than with women. You want more genetic mutations on men than women. But, I'm not... The question about discrimination is very complex. It's built of lots of things, right? It doesn't have to be, here you are, but it's what's your market power, what's your opportunity, all kinds of things like that. But at the end of the day, all of those things create an unequal wage distribution. There is a wage gap.
But then it becomes a perception thing as well, right? It's very hard to look at those things that you're talking about where we're going to look at it like, listen, I do X job. I'm female. He does the same job. And it's hard to look at the externalities that may also be contributing to the to what my wage is. So I think perception then becomes it becomes a reality where maybe it's justified in you not maybe getting paid as much for whatever the reason may be, but you're going to now interpret that as the sole reason is because you are female, and that's going to lead to dissatisfaction.
That's right. So, for example, there's a very nice set of papers on the fact that men love competition more than women. So imagine the following experiment. You give people a set of math problems, and you say, I'll give you $1 per problem. And they solve some problems. And then you say, okay, you could choose one of two things. You can either get paid $1 per problem that you solve in the next hour, or you can compete with 4 other people. And if you're the top performers, you'll get $5 per question. But if you're not the top performer, you'll get 0. Now imagine an axis of quality. Not so good in math, better in math, and really good in math. What you would want to do is the people who are not so good in math would say, I'm not competing. I will never be the first. I just want to get paid by my skill. And the people who are really good in math would say, okay, let me compete. What do the results show? Men compete all the time. The good math people, the men who are good in math compete, but also the people who are not so good in math compete. And women undercompete. So this is called a taste for competition, right? And we don't know if it's hereditary or if it's genetic or if it's environmental, but there are many, many differences. And one of the differences is that to try and climb the ladder, the professional ladder, it's a competition. And if you like to compete, you'll be more likely to do it. If you don't like to compete, you'll do it less. So eventually, what we see as a wage gap, I think that's what you're saying, could come from lots of places. It could come from taste for competition, and it could come from a power in negotiation. It could come from alternatives. It will come from all kinds of things like that. And absolutely, the social mechanisms for all of these are very complex.
Right. When you look at the big five traits, women score lower on disagreeableness, and I think that lends itself to maybe not pushing the issue when it comes to corporate America, and not being more agreeable and going with the flow. And I think that, we hear the word toxic masculinity, but that's more of a masculine trait. Now, it's not all men. Again, when we look at the middle, it's not that big of a difference. But the top go-getters are probably going to be more men because they're going to be more ruthless. And that's just that's capitalism. That's the society that we live in. Those people are going to get rewarded at a much higher rate than the person who just plays it safe and sits in the middle and hopes that you're going to see the great job that I'm doing.
Yep. Women also live longer. So they're doing something right.
Well, a lot of it is the fact that they're not involved in some of the more riskier jobs that men may partake in as well.
That's not all of it. They also have a better social support network. They do a few things all right.
That is, it's interesting. Yeah, but men, when it comes to gambling, again, I think that goes back to maybe why women just aren't necessarily all that interested in sports. But now you have the sports aspect where, of course, more men seem to be interested in sport. We're getting a lot more women come into the game as well. Fantasy sports, probably the biggest boom has come from women being interested in it and enjoying it and playing it. But again, when we talk about who is going to be the person who's going to actually do this professionally and sit in front of the computer, and it's for some people it's extremely boring. For others, obviously, who do this for a living, enjoy it, and they enjoy you're isolated to some degree when you're doing this. If you're a researcher, it perhaps similar. If you're kind of poring over data, you're kind of by yourself. If you're writing a book, you're doing that by yourself. And maybe the proclivity for men to be more apt to be less social and kind of get in those environments where women may want more of a human interaction as well leads to them not being, they may do it socially. They may go to the casino, which is a lot more fun, and be around other people, but maybe they're not going to sit in front of the computer for 10 hours and dig at numbers and become a professional sports bettor.
Yep. I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
So when I think about taking risks in life, I very much believe in karma. And my view of karma is you do the right things, you increase the chances good things will happen. You do bad things, you increase the chance bad things will happen. But my responsibility ends at the edge of my decision. Then the world will take it, and the world is random, and so on. So in everything I do in my personal life, when I take risks, projects, whatever, I always think, have I done a good job? Like I try not to evaluate myself with the outcome. Did it work out or not? But did I do a good job? And that keeps me motivated, because if I do something that the probability of success is very low, that doesn't matter, because if I've done my job correctly, I'm happy with myself. Like I give myself kudos for giving it my best, and that's it. And I wonder in the life of sports bettors, right? Is there something like this when you say, I've done the right analysis, I did the right thing, and it happened or not happened, that's the outcome. But I feel good about myself because I did my job correctly.
I used to go to therapy myself, and a lot of it was based on the fact that I would get, as most of us do, too emotionally attached maybe to how well or poorly I was doing. And what the therapist had said, and it stuck with me for many, many years since, was if you did the work and you trust your models and you've had success with those models in the past, then you have to be able to accept in the short term, things may not necessarily go as well as you had planned. And it's not a reflection on you. It's just the model just did not work this weekend or this week or this month. And you can't take the blame and put it on yourself. Now, externally, if you have a business like I do with the app, and we give advice to people and whatnot, it's a lot harder when other people are maybe gearing their anger towards you if they don't necessarily do well. But I always view it as we all make our own individual decisions. And if my decision is to follow someone else's advice, that is a decision I made, whether their advice is good or bad. So I agree. I try to live that way, where if I've done my analysis and I've done things properly, and when you talk about karma, I try to treat people properly as well, and the way I'd want to be treated. I think all of those things, it may not be a mystical thing, but I think that does come back to you in a lot of different ways if you treat yourself or if you conduct yourself in the right manner.
Very good. So
yes.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll just end with the following thing. I'm all in favor of you writing that book.
Well, I may have to email you for some advice from time and again.
With pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Of course.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this content.